All right, so today is writing on the wall. Writing on the wall. That's the name of the sermon. Yeah, you guys are all familiar with that phrase, right? It's the writing on the wall. I think we were trying to come up with stories about times when the writing was on the wall, and I think actually one of my favorite. I don't know if it's going to transfer, but it was Mark's grandfather. The last time I rode in a car with him, he was one of those guys that got a new Cadillac every year. You know, like it's one of those. And he's like, and we were at his house, my best friend Mark, and he goes, "I'll drive," and we're like, "Okay." He goes, "I just got the new Cadillac." You know, okay. And I praise God every day that I'm alive after that drive. And he said after the third time he was arrested for not driving well, and the state of Florida took his license, he said, "I guess the writing's on the wall that I can't drive anymore, boys." Right, like that. That's like I was like that's funny, right? Like, and it's over there. Like, but it also is tragic too. I remember I was editing a video of an interview with people that were in Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, and this family was telling about the time when water started to come into their house, and they had to bust through the roof. To cut through the roof to get on top of the house to get away from the water, from the surge. And they said by the time the water got to their second story, they knew the writing was on the wall, right? Like they're like, we should have left. And we didn't. Like it's a common phrase. The writing is on the wall, right? If your insurance goes up because you've gotten multiple speeding tickets, the writing's on the wall, right? You know, if it's all these things about the writing being there, that you know that this has happened. Did you know that phrase came from Daniel? Literally, it came from Daniel chapter 5. It's where we're going through today. And what I want to start off somewhere. I'm going to start off right at the end of the story, and I want you to see something, because I think the end of the story helps colorize the rest of the story here in Daniel chapter 5. It says here at the end, that very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, the Babylonian king, and Darius, the Mede, received the kingdom. No, Belshazzar, Chaldean king, was killed. And the king of the Medes and the Persians received the kingdom of Babylon. And he was about 62 years old. So what has happened? At the end of this story here today, we have the king of Babylon, but kinda. It's kind of a weird story, but I'm not going to get into the details. But the king of Babylon is killed by another kingdom's king, right? And it says that very night. So what happened during this night for that to happen? That's what's going on. So if you remember in Daniel here, what has happened is there's this king of Babylon named Nebuchadnezzar, and he kind of took over the kingdom of Israel. He kind of took him over, the kingdom of Judah, the kingdom of Israel, took them into himself, and so that Israel would become Babylonian rather than constantly fighting to get out, he took some of their best people, the people from the royal courts there in Israel. He took them and he says, "You need to become part of us." And so he gave them Babylonian names. He told them to eat like Babylonians, but there's all these stories where they refuse to do that. And God continues to bless them. But the thing is they are still trying to bless Babylon, but they keep on. Hold on, sorry, but he keeps on leading. They keep blessing Babylon and trying to be helpful, but they aren't denying who they are. They aren't denying who they are at all. And we end up seeing that Nebuchadnezzar keeps being kind of a thorn in the sides of all these, but he ends up, and we talked about this last week, he ends up turning and repenting towards the Lord. Now what happens here is about 20 years after Nebuchadnezzar is no longer king. It's about 20 years, so that's a good amount of time, and we're introduced to this leader now called Belshazzar. And this guy's not the best. In fact, I got to be careful how I describe his life, because his life is full, we'll say that. So Belshazzar, when he had tasted the wine, this is the first problem with this translation into English here. Tasted the wine. Does that really mean tasted? Like, whenever I think of taste, it's like when you go to like Whole Foods or something like that, and they got the little taster thing or something, like, and you grab like a thimble of wine, right? Like, that's tasting. That's not what's going on here. When he was drunk and had tasted every wine, basically, right? Like, he had it all. He was drunk beyond measure, so he's having a huge party. Now remember, later tonight, he is taken over by another kingdom. He has this huge party, and he commanded that the vessels of gold and silver that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken out of the temple of Jerusalem be brought, that the king and his lords, his wives, his concubines may drink from them. So let's talk about this for a second. I'm going to try not to use certain words that I used in Sunday school today. If you want to get you should come to Sunday school if you want the unfiltered, unvarnished. So let's see if we can get you to where we need to get you, right? Without saying certain words. We're in mixed company right now, right? So he took the stuff out of the temple and brought that the king, his lords, and all of his ladies may continue to party and get drunk using. Are you seeing where? Okay, all right, cool. All right. So this is let's go old like biblical word, debaucherous party, right? Like this is a party where they're all drunk and they're all enjoying each other's company, right? And so he starts throwing this party, and what's he saying though? If he grabbed all the important stuff, he grabbed the chalice, we have a chalice here for communion. He grabbed the chalice and all these things out of the temple of the Judeans. He's saying to himself, he's like, look at how powerful and awesome I am. Look at how amazing I am. Look at how my fathers, they conquered all these mighty nations. They conquered them all. This is for me. He goes, I'm in charge. I can do whatever I want with any of these things. And so he does this, and immediately, then they brought the golden vessels that had been taken out of Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, concubines drank them, and they drank wine and praised the gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Like he drinks them, right? They're having this drunken party, and he's like, he's kind of, man. Can you give me a glass of water? Thanks. I don't know what's going on. So he has all this stuff that he's drinking to. He's basically drinking to his own power. Because remember that statue that King Nebuchadnezzar saw? Do you remember what it was made out of? It was gold, silver, bronze, iron. Remember that? Thanks, Kevin. Like that he had that. He had this statue that he had seen, and now this guy's drinking to the power that is going on. Now, let me see if you guys can catch something, though. He's drinking, and he's wanting to pull the temple things out from Judah to drink out of them to show off his power. Who is outside the gates of Babylon right now? Now, you got to think about it. You got to read between the lines. Remember, at the end of this story, he's killed by a rival kingdom. The Medes and the Persians, the Persians are about to take over what's going on here. Right? They're about to take over Babylon, and they are outside the city gates, most likely right now. They're outside the city gates, and they're going to take over them. And what is this guy doing? He's throwing a raging party. right? Like that's what he's doing. We've never seen anyone in history ever do anything like that, right? We have never, like have you ever been so financially in debt that you're just like, it's so bad we might as well just go out to eat, right? Like it's so bad we might as well just like put on the blinders and just go out there, right? Like even though our credit cards are begging for mercy and the handwriting's on the wall, we're just like, well, eat and drink, for tomorrow we die, right? Like that's kind of what he's doing here. He's showing off his power even though there's danger right outside the gates. And then it says this right here. So it goes, immediately fingers from a disembodied hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the hand as it wrote. Then the king's color changed, and his thoughts alarmed him, and his limbs gave way, and his knees knocked together, and he fell down. Like that's he's over here, but his color changed. And this is what I think his color changed from that of a Middle Eastern Babylonian to a medieval white guy in Rembrandt's painting here. Like this is a photograph of the event. Like all of a sudden he just completely, he sees this disembodied hand right on the wall and he freaks out. And he doesn't know what to do. At least something's gotten his attention, right? At least something. Like this guy, he's just ignoring all the signs around him, and suddenly something miraculous happens, and that finally gets him. And he ends up asking for all of his sorcerers and the magicians and all of that, and they don't know what to do. They're all scared. And then because this king, who is more interested in partying than protecting, he's more interested in showing off his power than actually governing, right? Like this king, they're scared that he's going to do something. They're like, hey, there's this Judean called Daniel. He did lots of stuff for Nebuchadnezzar, your father. And he brings Daniel in. And he goes, Daniel, what does it mean? And Daniel looks at him and goes, dude, have you not listened at all? Have you not listened to what has happened before you? Like your father, Nebuchadnezzar, this guy had built Babylon. He was the stuff, and yet he was brought down low, all the way till he lost his image, till it was on the ground. He had become like a beast of the field, that his fingernails had become like talons, that his hair had become like eagle's feathers, whatever that means. It's just in the Bible, right? That he had become like a beast of the field, that he had lost his image, and that he had finally looked up. He looked up to the heavens and was restored. He goes, don't you remember that? Why are you acting this way? Like it's written on the wall, and this is what it says on the wall. And he says, the writing says this, Mene, Mene, Tekel in Persian. Like this is the interpretation of the Mene. Mene says that God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you've been weighed in the balance and found wanting. And Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Like this guy is the poster child, literally, for it's written on the wall around you. Like look around outside, look around somewhere else. Your father Nebuchadnezzar, when things were at its direst time, he looked up. And he looked up into the heavens. All you're doing is looking into the bottom of your wine glass. All you're doing is looking down into the bottom of your party. And he says, God has numbered you. He's numbered your days, and he's found judgment. The writings on the wall. So that's the story. And we find out that right after Daniel tells him this, it says that king died that night. And that was the end of the Babylonian Empire. And you guys know Babylon, right? Babylon was like one of the 8th wonders of the world at the time. It had the hanging gardens. This place was nothing but power. And we see here it's at the end of its reign and it's going away. This party is going to nothing. And I think this is what the warning is for us in this story. Is that sometimes we get so consumed by our own wants and our own powers that we would rather focus on just having those powers than what the writing on the wall is, right? Like my friend's grandpa that was at the end of his driving, right? Like those people in Katrina. All the times and the little times in my life when I realized the writing's on the wall, I don't need to be here anymore. I don't need to be part of this anymore. That this is a disaster waiting to happen. And the thing that I think this is telling us to do is stop and look around. Because so often we're just so consumed with just going forward and forward and forward, no matter what's happening around us, and we don't stop for a second and assess the situation. We don't stop for a second and look around and we can do all kinds of things, because when all we think about is going forward, 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 we're willing to sell ourselves out. When we think that everything that we're doing is righteous and good, oftentimes that allows us to do unspeakable evils in the name of that righteousness. That's when we think that we're doing all these things, we're like, well, let's just eat, drink, and marry, right? Let's just do this. Maybe your whole life that you stood up for a certain way of life, for a certain morality, and you thought that was the best thing ever, that it couldn't get any better than that. But all of a sudden, things start going away from there. And so you're like, oh no, I have to keep this power. And so you're like the king, and you're like, well, I don't care what happens. We just have to keep our power. We'll have the parties, we'll have the whatever. This king was so consumed with the power of his past that he refused to deal with the enemy at the gates. And it took God's writing on the wall to get in touch with him. So kind of the message today is stop and look. But that's a rough message to hear. Because we all know it's rough, but I want you to hear the Christian story, because we have the same saying in Christians. It's the writing's on the wall. But instead of the writing is on the wall and it being judgment, we see that it's God's love for us. Because all throughout the Old Testament, all throughout this story here in Nebuchadnezzar, it says that God is coming to, you better watch out, God is coming to get you. His judgment's going to come. And it's kind of scary for us all. But what we actually see is that when the judgment of God came, it came upon God himself, upon Jesus. That when the judgment of God came, when the great and glorious day of the Lord came, it came upon Jesus, that he's the one that took it all so that God wouldn't lose any of us. And in case you think that that's just some hippy-dippy, Christian, New Testament idea, I want to read to you from Isaiah. And this part of Isaiah is when God's people first went into Babylon. And it said this. It says, guess what God is talking about himself. It says, can a woman forget her nursing child, that she should have no compassion on the son of her womb? This is what God's saying. Can God forget his people? Can God forget his people? Can God forget the child who has been in his womb? That's what God is saying there, right? And even though they may forget, I will not. You see that? Behold, I have engraved. Bad translation. Engraved? What is engraving? It says engraved on the palms of my hands. What is engraved? If you want to engrave something on the palm of your hands, what's the word for that? Tattoo. Sometimes our puritanical culture gets in touch with us so much that we change the word from tattoo to engraved. Ridiculous. It's an example of God tattooing your name onto the palm of his hand so that you will never be forgotten. You see that? That this is how God is the whole time. That when we feel like God has been distant and far and we've done all these things that we have forgotten him, that he has never forgotten us because our names are tattooed on the palm of his hand. And we saw that by when judgment came, God took the judgment onto himself on the cross. So remember the writings on the wall. That Jesus loves you. That he's for you. And he's even for your neighbor who wants you to build a $200,000 wall. It's an inside joke with this church right now. Sorry for all the Baptists, like all that stuff. We're in a deal with the HOA behind us. But that's that God loves and is for everybody. Right? Like that's their names are written on his palms. So remember what the Lord has done. Remember the writing on the wall, that is our hope. That you are written in the hands of Jesus, who took that writing and is giving you life. So let's yield to him, trusting that he has united us with himself. And I think that's good news. And we'll end right there. Jesus